guys, so this is a DrumWise Meets, and today I'm here with Ian Palmer. Hi, Ian.
Hey Tom, how you doing? It's good to see you, buddy.
So my first question for you today is, what equipment do you use? Now, obviously, in this situation that we're in now, your equipment may be slightly different to what you'd normally use for a gig, but just talk us through your equipment setup in general.
Actually, do you know, the equipment that I'm using here in my practice room at home is actually really no different to the equipment that I will use live. It's my instrument. It's the instrument that I play. So I've got a Yamaha, been with Yamaha now for quite a few years. I've got a Yamaha Recording Custom drum set, which is the new version of the Recording Custom made in China. It's a fantastic sounding drum set actually, but I've kind of modified it here at home. I'm just using these Remo silent stroke heads. I've got some Zildjian L80 low volume cymbals, keeping the neighbors happy. And I've got some triggers on top of these drums as well. So I'm sort of been getting into the electronic side. Well, it's been an education for me. So yeah, I'm using this Recording Custom kit and some Zildjian cymbals.
Excellent. So what age did you start playing? What was your first drum kit, and what bands or artists inspired you when you first started playing?
Yeah, I was 9 when I first picked up drumsticks. I come from a family of drummers. I have 2 uncles who play drums as well. So we're a musical family. So I really got serious about it at the age of 9. And my uncle actually arranged for me to have a drum kit, which was... It was a Premier Resonator drum set, which was amazing. It was a beautiful white drum set. And yeah, I used to practice for hours on that, really upsetting all the neighbors. And I think the first bands that I was really influenced by, do you know what? My hero, really, drumming wise, has always been Steve Gadd. And I think I became really aware of Steve Gadd even at the age of sort of 9 and 10. And this was through watching those VHS drumming videos, the in session and the up close videos. So I think probably, yeah, that was he as a musician was probably my earliest influence. And I must say, he's one of my greatest influences today.
And what an influence. Well, so that probably answers this next question. So I think this is a tough one here because I'd find it hard to pick just one. But if you had to pick just one, who's your favourite drummer of all time?
Okay, this is a more of a challenging one. Yeah, I always say Steve Gadd, but there's a handful of drummers because ultimately for me, you know, I always talk about this thing when I'm teaching, the maturity continuum about how it's ripped off basically from Stephen Covey with the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a fantastic book. But I realized that actually he talks about the way we grow as human beings, and I talk in my lessons about the way we grow as musicians and specifically as drummers. So for me, I can't pick one drummer. I really can't, because ultimately I've taken a handful of different influences, put it into a melting pot in the hope that my voice comes out sounding something like me. And that for me is then when you sort of developing this maturity on the instrument, you know, you hopefully develop your own thing. And I'm sort of, you know, not always you can hear the influences in there, but I don't think you can hear one specific influence. Hopefully there's a number of them in the melting pot.
That's a really nice answer, because I firmly believe that as well. So people that I was influenced by when I was 15, I'm still influenced by them, but I've now got other influences, and I feel that as a drummer, as a musician, you know, we take on board all those influences as we grow. So I've got more influences now than I had when I was 15. So that's why it's hard to just pick one.
Well, this is this thing with this maturity continuum, which I always go on about. That I know the moment I wanted to pick up sticks was the first time. The first influence for me was my Uncle Carl, watching him play with an old band called Emerson, Lake and Palmer in the 70s. And this was a VHS video. And I said to my dad, this is what I want to do. And he thought, well, it's kind of cool. It's a bit of a family business, really. It's playing drums. So that was the first idea. But then I learned my first rhythm. And that was probably the Gadd influence, trying to sound like him. And I was just mesmerized by that whole thing, just to feel the groove. And you suddenly realize that you're useful to somebody, but then you develop this one influence. And for me, actually, it's probably Dave Weckl in the late 80s, early 90s. And I had the 8-inch tom and a 10-inch rack tom. And I wanted to be Dave Weckl. I probably, even as a teenager, had like the mullet and all of that. So I wanted to be just like Dave Weckl. But, you know, that's kind of... everybody around that time did. But I think as you mature, then that's when you sort of get all these other influences, and then you start developing your sound on the instrument, really. So yeah, that's the way it went for me, or that's the way it's continuing to go. And I will say, actually, those influences change regularly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What do you think has been the highlight of your career so far?
I was wondering if you were going to ask that question. Well, I've got to say, the highlight of my career so far was a concert that I did in 2015. And guess which drummer I shared the stage with?
I may have seen the video.
Steve Gadd, yeah. So he was my absolute hero. So for me, that was the moment I thought, yeah, do you know what? I've done everything I want to do in drumming. This is amazing. Well, I haven't, of course, but that moment was just an amazing feeling to be able to play next to Steve and to be able to. So I think that was a big moment. I was definitely a fan. I was a little bit starstruck, to be honest, but it was great. But actually, just to realize how normally, as they always say, don't they? Never meet your heroes, but yeah, that's a load of nonsense, because actually Steve Gadd was one of the loveliest people you can meet. Sorry. Anyway, enough of the Steve Gadd promotion. Next question.
I think that's an interesting point, though, because sometimes you meet your heroes, and if they're if they're a really nice person, then it's a great experience. But I've met other heroes where I've come away from it, I've been like, oh, because they haven't been so nice, or they've not had the time for you.
That's the thing, actually. You should never be. It's interesting when you talk about doing gigs as well. You should never be prejudiced, because I've been hired before to play with guys who have got mainly sort of an older generation that have a fearsome reputation, and I've been like, oh, shit, thinking about this and playing, as perfectly as I can, and actually you begin to relax, and you find out, do you know what? They're really cool people. I don't know, it's just one person's experience, and one person would put that, out there. So yeah, I've learned sort of not to be too judgmental about it, because you never know how you're going to find somebody.
That's it, exactly. So when you first get a gig with a new artist, how do you learn the material? So do you just listen to the stuff? Are you sent any drum music for it, or do you listen to it and transcribe it, or is it all of the above?
It's all of the above, and it's different depending on the gig. I come from a jazz. I'm a drummer, so I play all sorts of music, but I come from basically a jazz background, which in itself is an improvised form of music. So you maybe would know the head of the piece of music, but you would you'd fit in with whatever's going around you. You'd learn to be, I guess, malleable and be able to change a bit like a chameleon. So that's for that side. But occasionally, if you're working, I've been fortunate enough to be more involved with the recording side and working with different artists there. They would play you something down, and you have to learn to do a shorthand, like a studio kind of shorthand of this, where maybe you'd only just get the number of bars in each section, whether it's like an 8-bar verse, 8-bar bridge, 8-bar chorus, and to a middle 8, and you might write some sort of indication, so you can do a shorthand. So I think really the honest answer, without rambling on, is actually it's different for every scenario, really. And occasionally you'll do a session where I was fortunate enough to play on the Tomb Raider 4 soundtrack, and that was arranged by Richard Niles, who's a fantastic arranger. But he writes in a different way, because he almost writes transcriptions. So you need to see, so he'll have an idea of this kind of, his favorite drummers are like the classic ones that I've mentioned, and he'll have this idea in mind, and he wants you to sound in this way, and he'll actually write out note for note what he wants the fill to be. And it's impossible in the spur of the moment to sight read that stuff, so you kind of got to prepare for it in advance. That's what I'd call a transcription. Other things, so you might sit in with a big band and you would play what I call an orchestration, which is where you'd have an indication of all the music, but it might actually tell you what the trumpets are playing or what the saxophones are playing, and it's up to your discretion then to fill around that. So I think really in the short answer is there's no set way of preparing for a gig. It depends on the musical style, on whatever you're doing.
But just coming off of that slightly then, so for people that are learning, reading drum music is kind of helpful, do you think?
Reading drum music is really helpful, and that ability to know the form of music, I think, is vital in shortcutting hours and hours of just learning in your own head how this goes. Okay, I know it's going to the chorus now, but not being aware of how many bars, have gone before. So knowing the geography of music, I think, and understanding that is vital. One of the things I've been getting into actually since we've been in this lockdown situation is just using Sibelius more and transcribing. And that's interesting. So it's slightly off topic again, but so many people practice their hand technique, they practice their paradiddles and all that. And some guys actually even practice their feet, which is also a pretty good tip. But actually, I've also been thinking about transcribing things as well, slowing things down, as you can do on YouTube now, and then inputting that into Sibelius and trying to get a close approximation. So taking that idea literally as someone would have played it. So for instance, somebody like some of those classic grooves, David Garibaldi, some of those linear patterns, taking those, transcribing them, learning what he's doing, but then learning to doing two things. Number one, put your slant on it. And number two, just purely from a technical point of view, to try and free up both sides of the body. I've been trying to practice those things, left-hand lead as well, left hand on the hi-hat. And that's interesting. That's an interesting challenge. So, yeah, I guess learning to read is fantastic for shortcutting the learning process.
Good stuff. Totally agree. Thought I'd get that one in there. Have you ever had anything go wrong on stage that you've had to recover from that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I remember, one slightly amusing situation that happened years ago at the start of my career. I was involved in a drum clinic, and it was an amazing opportunity to open up a show for Mark Schulman.
Oh, yeah.
One of these events that we were doing for, used to play Sabian cymbals, and fortunate enough to do that, and it was a drum clinic for them, and we started playing. I started playing, but in my naivety, I didn't realize that they had like dry ice on the stage, and I thought there was like a fire breaking out behind me, and I was trying to get the attention of the monitor engineer, and it was kind of cool, couldn't understand what I was talking about. It took me like a second to realize, okay, it's like dry ice, but it was kind of my naivety, really. The other thing which happens a lot is, I guess maybe breaking bass drum heads, going through bass drum heads is a common one. But do you know what? Touch wood. I use quite a simple setup. I haven't really been blighted with too many catastrophes. Fortunately.
Now, I know one of the answers to this next question. However, it doesn't really class as a hobby anymore for you because of it being part of your job. But what are your hobbies away from drums?
Okay, well, I'm very keen on aviation. I know that's kind of not a secret for anyone that knows me. Yeah, I've been involved with flying jet airline aircraft for a few years now. It's something I fell into actually, but it's been quite a good way of supplementing my income as a musician. But I always say that I'm a musician that flies airplanes, not a pilot that plays drums. So I guess really aviation's been the passion. But aside from earning money from it, I love the aerobatic side of flying as well. I just love the freedom of just being out there and the thrill of it, really. Yeah, so I think really flying is one of the big hobbies. And I will say actually as well, one of the other hobbies that I've been involved with over the past 8 years is I'm a keen runner. So I love exercise, running mainly. I get pretty bored in the gym, but I guess a hobby is for me is a positive hobby is running. So.
Is there like a coordination aspect to piloting a plane? I know obviously like helicopter is more, from what I've been told, is more like moving, 4 limbs and stuff. And there was a guy, I forget what the band were called. I think they were called Ocean Size, some like prog rock band. And he had this really weird setup with his hi-hat in the middle. And he used to be a helicopter pilot. And people used to say, oh, it's because of, all of this. But is there any sort of coordinating of limbs involved?
There really is. And when you're flying for an airline, obviously safety is the primary goal. That's the first things first. It has to be safe. So one of the things that we do every 6 months in the simulator is practice engine failures. So we'll be going out in a simulator, of course. We'll be going down the runway, and just as you pick the nose off the ground in order, we call it, as you rotate to get airborne, the instructor in the back will fail an engine. And without getting too technical about it, well, it'll cause the aeroplane to go in this motion, which is a yawing motion. So you do have to simultaneously press the rudder pedal. So you bring the nose back straight, which is it's on the vertical fin at the back. You have to then simultaneously get the aeroplane away from the ground and select a very certain attitude. And at the same time, with your other hand, you have to push the thrust levers forward. And as you create more thrust with the live engine, you have to add more rudder then to counteract the further yaw. So there's definitely that's probably the most challenging maneuver that we would do in practice, and that's rehearsing basically for the worst case scenario. I heard, actually, I don't know a lot about helicopters. I mean, they all look quite scary to me, because as soon as that thing stops spinning around, I kind of get the impression you're only going to go in one direction. At least with aeroplanes, if the engines stop rotating, you can do a Sully and land on the Hudson perhaps. But, so it's a different kind of thing, isn't it? I don't really get that, but I know someone said to me that actually flying a helicopter is a bit like balancing an egg on a teaspoon. So it's
okay.
I don't know. I understand that's what it's like.
Cool. So, what sort of person do you think you need to be successful in the music industry, if I can call it an industry?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think to be a successful person in the music industry, you've got to be someone who is a people person. You've got to be resilient to knockbacks. So in other words, you've got to be fairly thick-skinned, I think. You've got to be, not somebody who's going to be too upset by being rejected. You've got to be able to put up with that, and you've got to be focused. So I think it's an interesting combination. And I will say actually that as I play professionally now. I don't have the backup of flying. So I'm realizing now straight away, you've got to have so many different skills. It's not just about being, it's not being competent or being a great drummer or playing well on the drums. That's part of it, but it's the way you present yourself, and it's the things that I saw something on Facebook actually, which I thought was really good, and it was a list of things that don't take any talent, such as returning phone calls, showing up on time, being respectful, being professional. Those little things that people can forget, which actually don't take any practice at all. It's just the things that you apply to your game, right? So returning emails, a good one. Returning phone calls.
And speaking about you now making your living through drums, you've been doing some online masterclasses. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that and how people can sign up and what's involved?
I'd love to tell you about that. Yeah, no, it's absolutely. No, this whole thing now, of course, we've moved online. I'm looking at you on a screen, so we need to get this online thing down. And for me, it's not just about doing one-to-one lessons. It's been about, from a professional point of view, connecting with people, as many people as possible. And I know there's these drum hangs that people are starting to do now, which are great. But one of the things I've been doing, I've been thinking about, well, how can I maximize my reach and put the information across, give people value for money, and give them something which actually they enjoy and inspires them to come back. So I've been trying to do these online workshops and get these going, so you could get maybe 10 or 20 people along, and they're good value. So £15 for the hour. We end up doing about an hour and a half. But what I do is I set them up before by sending them what I'm going to show people via an email, and of course the Zoom login. That's the format that we use. Then we spend time doing the session where we can refine things and make sure that people understand what I've shown them. And then it's the classic thing. And after the event, I'll send them another email to tell them what I told them. So yeah, it seems to be good. And basically, it's not just my knowledge. This is sort of 35 years of playing drums, but it's stuff which I've taken from Joe Morello, Jim Chapin, who those guys also took stuff from, of course, their teachers, George Lawrence Stone, Sanford Moeller. But then my lessons with Peter Erskine, Dave Weckl, Jeff Hamilton, I'm kind of the eternal student. I never really feel that, I will never ever feel that I've achieved what I want to achieve with drumming. So I'm always trying to push forward. So learning from those people, it's nice to be able to pass some of those ideas on in hopefully a cost-effective way and a fun way.
Absolutely. And how can people book one of those with you? How do they get in contact?
Okay, so a couple of ways. My email address is really simple, ian@ianpalmer.com. Alternatively, find me on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, Ian Palmer Drums. each one. My Ian Palmer drummer page on Facebook is the artist page, so you can find me there. And actually what I'm doing is every Monday I'm doing a get together with everybody, a live stream at 12:30 where I play a bit, we ask questions, we all get into a conversation about something specific to do with drumming. On Wednesdays I've been doing the workshop, I call it Masterclass workshop thing. I'm possibly going to move those to Sunday in the future when we start going back to work. But on Fridays I've been getting together and doing the chats. So I had a few people along to come and talk to me. In fact, my friend Simon Edgoose, who is the demonstrator for Yamaha, came along. We had a really good session because he was talking about how to incorporate hybrid drums or electronics into a home setup, because obviously, we need to keep the volume down. And he was really quite useful. I think everyone enjoyed it. So yeah, the numbers are building a little bit, but that's kind of not the point. It's just nice to get together with everybody and talk drums and talk about what we're passionate about, as opposed to the depressing stuff we see on TV and online. So,
and people should definitely try and take advantage of this and booking some time with you, because I've heard good things. So get booking now, people. So my next question, which is one that you don't know about. So yes, don't worry, it's a good one. It's a cracker. So my next question is probably the most important one. What's your favourite biscuit?
My favourite biscuit. My favourite biscuit right now, and it's a real problem, are these, and these are quite posh biscuits, but it's these really chocolatey Marks and Spencer's biscuits. Super chocolatey ones. I mean, massive amount of calories. So I've got to do this running to keep this weight off here. But yeah, so you get to middle age and it starts to go around here, doesn't it? The weight around your middle bit. So Marks and Spencer's super chocolatey biscuits. I think that's what they're called. But really chocolatey biscuits.
So, but the sub question here is, if you've got one of those biscuits, dunk or no dunk?
I dunk. I dunk the chocolate in the tea. I'm a big tea drinker.
Good stuff. A few people have said about dunking in coffee, but I don't know how I feel about that.
I'm not sure. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I'm like coffee as well. I'm definitely a tea and a coffee person, and I've been a bit gutted that I know it's kind of not maybe the greatest coffee in the world, but I love Starbucks. It's become a bit of an addiction, so it's been pretty tough while these places have been closed.
Yeah,
saving a bit of money though, at least.
When you're flying, by the way, do you get, if it's a long flight, do you get brought tea and coffee?
We do. So what happens is the cabin crew have to visit the flight deck every 20 minutes, and that's the legislation to make sure, of course, that we're still alive. The problem with it is actually it's been quite nice. Although the biscuits have been a bit of a thing, the truth is I actually have lost a little bit of weight in lockdown with the running, because the problem is every 20 minutes the cabin crew, the girls and boys will come and see you, and they'll think they're being really nice because they'll bring like a bowl of M&Ms. But when it happens every 20 minutes, you end up eating yourself across the Atlantic, literally.
Do you have to be careful as well if you're drinking tea? I guess you have to not get it over the.
There's a serious point to this actually. There's a new aeroplane that's the airline I work for have got, and it's one of the most modern aircraft in the world. It's called the Airbus A350. The latest Airbus aircraft. The problem is the engine controls in the middle of the center console here have two levers, which are the engine master switches. Basically, you move those, you turn the engines off.
Oh.
And so when it starts to go a bit quiet, that's not great. But what they found is actually now in the airline we have to have these sports cups with proper seal tops on them, because there's been some incidences of pilots spilling tea and coffee over the center console, and what it does actually, it goes into the engine system, or just the controls of it, and has actually caused an in-flight engine shutdown.
Wow.
Which is not good. So they're really hot on that actually. You've got to be really careful. There's also been some less dramatic things, but equally as difficult situations to get out of, where people have spilt tea on the radio panel, so the communications panel, so you no longer are talking to air traffic control. In fact, you think you still, it all goes quiet for a while, and you think, oh, where they're gone, and you realize that you've actually lost contact with them. You have a backup frequency. The problem with that is after 9/11, of course, any airplane that's not speaking to anybody is a potential threat. So they don't give you very long before they send up the military aircraft to see what's going on.
Oh, right.
Quite costly. So yeah, absolutely. So don't spill tea in the flight deck. Not a good idea.
Yeah. All from a cup of tea. Wow.
Absolutely, mate. You'd be really surprised the amount of problems a cup of tea has caused in aeroplanes.
So yeah, so no dunking while you're flying then.
No dunking, no dunking, no. So what we do get actually, which is I try to be a good boy, we get these big bottles of water at the start of the flight as well. So the challenge is actually to drink that whole few liters, a couple of liters of water, which is good because I mean the air in there actually is pretty dry. So the humidity is about 30%. It's about 60% here where we are on the surface of the Earth, but it's about 30% on average in an aeroplane. So you actually, your skin can dry up quite quickly and you get sore lips. So yeah, you've got to keep drinking plenty of water. That's for sure.
But then another question, which I can easily cut out of this. So, because for me, if I'm drinking loads of water, which I really try to do now, surely you need to wheeze.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the problem. So you have to time it that you get all your drinking in early in the flight, so you've got access to go to the toilet, because the schoolboy error is to leave it all to the last minute. So you do our little briefing before we start the descent. We start the descent and all of a sudden you go into a holding pattern somewhere, so they're delaying you. Next thing is you're platting your legs on the approach, and that's a bit distracting actually. So
you can't, once you're doing that, you're there. You can't
really. I mean, yeah, I suppose people have nipped out the flight deck very quickly at the start of the descent, but once you get into the final stages, of course, no, you're in your seat from certainly below 10,000 feet. That's it, you know. Above maybe 20,000 feet, you're not going anywhere.
So my final question for you is, if you could give one bit of advice to up and coming drummers, what would that be?
I think the best advice I could give an up and coming drummer is to not only focus on your drumming, but become aware of the technology that surrounds drumming as well. So become conversant with, Pro Tools or Logic, understand hybrid drums. And, a lot of young guys are really conversant with technology anyway, but I think the technology side of it is absolutely vital. Don't limit yourself just to playing an acoustic drum kit. As it has its merits and it's fantastic and it's brilliant, but I think actually to be a professional musician today, you need to be able to stream, you need to be able to teach online, you need to be able to get a sound quickly, you need to be able to manipulate your sound in the studio, maybe work as say Pro Tools or Logic. Writing is really good. I mean, you talk about where's the money in the music industry. Well, I think it's historically it's always been in the writing side of it, and I think that's really important. Make sure that you've got some credits ideally get yourself some credits on a hit single, and that's a pretty good way of doing it. So so I just think the advice is, to sum it up, is just don't limit yourself just to playing drums. Think about the bigger picture.
Great advice. Good stuff. Ian, thank you so much for spending your time with us here at DrumWise today. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
It's a pleasure to see you. Thanks, Tom.